Hello, and welcome to another episode of I Just Want to Be Included. My name is Veronica Olson, and today you will meet my friend Alex. Alex is going into his senior year of high school and has been transitioning from female to male over the last few years. I know this is a difficult topic for some. People have very strong feelings and thoughts about gender issues. You may not like or agree with everything you hear in this podcast, and that's okay. The goal of this podcast is to bring humanity to difficult topics. We are called to love each other and to have patience with one another. There is no place for hate, making others' lives difficult, or dehumanizing people. I just ask, as always, that you listen with an open heart and mind and have some compassion. People struggling with gender or sexual identity are human beings with thoughts and feelings, just trying to find their place in this world. They have family and friends who love them and are trying to support them. As always, anything said during this episode is based on personal opinion, thoughts, and experience. Nothing said should be taken as professional advice. Everyone is different. Every situation is different. Please always seek professional help in your community to deal with whatever you or your child might be facing. Enjoy the episode. Very excited to talk to you. The first thing I want to ask you is, how do you identify from a gender perspective?
From a gender perspective, I identify, the term I usually use is trans guy. He, and like my pronouns are he, him.
He, him. Okay.
Yeah.
And so one thing that I've learned, because I have a child at home that's gone through some gender identity issues, is it's really important to ask people how they identify.
Yeah, I totally agree, because nobody knows better than themselves.
Right. And it's easier to ask, and I feel like it's more respectful to ask than to assume or, to guess.
Definitely.
Right.
Although, one thing I will say is, if you are like 90% sure of something, go ahead and try it out and then ask if it's okay. Because like, I know for me personally, I like it when people assume, because I'm somebody who, like, if there's any doubt in your mind at all, by all means ask. But I'm somebody who I am pretty straight passing. Listeners, you can't see me, but I'm about 6 feet tall, stocky, and I have a beard. So
right.
I'm not exactly getting pointed out on the street a lot. So sometimes for me, when somebody asks me how I identify at this point in my transition, I go, yeah, and I'm glad you asked if there was any concern about that. But part of me is like, damn it, I didn't fool them. So just only ask if there's a reasonable window of doubt, and you can always be like, is this okay afterwards and stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think just talking to people about gender issues, there's just a lot of fear of getting it wrong and saying the wrong thing, saying the wrong pronoun. And so I've kind of told people the same thing. Just ask. Most people, if you ask respectfully, they don't mind. They're more than happy to answer. So
I'm a relatively special case in that category. Most of my friends that are trans, every time somebody asks them, they get really excited, because that means, oh, they're seeing me as somebody who's not cis.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So kind of where I wanted to start is, when I've known you for quite a while, so when in your childhood, can you look back and see, you know what, something didn't seem right, or you felt different, or something was off? However you want to describe that.
Really, kind of from the beginning, I knew that there wasn't that. I kind of knew that I didn't fit into whatever the general boxes were that you could put a person in, because I didn't like dresses. I hated dolls.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't necessarily like play with trucks or action figures or anything, but it's like I played sports as a kid.
Right.
And I've always had a lot more like masculine interests. And but the first time I was like, oh shoot, something about my gender was actually in 5th grade. I was in a musical and I had to get this wife beater for an undershirt. And it was this really masculine tank top. And I wore that thing after that show like 24/7. I'd wash it every other day.
So it felt right.
But then I'd like hide the fact that I was wearing it. Like I'd always throw on like another shirt to leave my room. And there was something that just I felt so good in it. And I couldn't put that to words. And it wasn't until years later when I was like, oh, that was definitely a trans thing.
Right. Yeah. That's definitely a moment you can pinpoint and be like, okay, this felt different, but it felt good different.
Yeah.
It was an affirming kind of feeling. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And like, even as a kid, funny enough, because like I said, I've always looked more masculine. So I always wanted my hair really short. Then they finally cut my hair short. And then sometimes I'd get misgendered, well, actually gendered correctly in public. And I would feel something bubble inside of me. And then I'd just get uncomfortable because it was kind of like a truth I wasn't ready to admit to myself kind of thing.
Right. Right.
Not everybody has that experience, but that's definitely something I've had.
Right. So at what point when you started dealing with these different feelings, did you start thinking this is definitely a gender issue? Because I want people to understand this isn't like waking up one day and, oh, I'm going to do this. This isn't seeing somebody on a TikTok video and going, oh, I want to do that. That's not how this process goes, right? No. And so kind of the process of struggling with feelings, and what is that like?
For me, a lot of it was just trying to find words for my feelings. Right. Like, I've always struggled with mental health issues, and a lot of that, and so have a lot of other trans people. Funny enough, I've been in... How I ended up like finding the words to describe what I was feeling was I was actually hospitalized for mental health issues. And half of the other teenagers in there were trans because it just such disproportionately affects trans people. Because, especially because you are constantly being told you are something you're not. And there's this phrase in psychology, they use it, cognitive dissonance, where basically the reality you feel does not match the reality you're living. And it happens in a bunch of different things, but it was happening with me really bad during my 8th grade year. And I was actually getting like, and at the time I didn't know it was fully about gender, but every time I'd get gendered or anything, I'd have like a panic attack, or I'd get really bad vertigo. And which is really weird in hindsight how physically it manifested for me. Right. But then over time, I started to slowly be like, oh, I realized my sexuality, but then something was still off. And I was actually in denial about it for years. Yeah. And like when people would ask me, oh, how do you know you're not trans? I'd go, well, because I guess I'm not. And I was very clearly like I was hiding something from myself. But after going through stuff with my mental health, I was like, okay, I can't ignore this part of me anymore.
Right. It was kind of connecting dots in a way of like, okay, I'm feeling and thinking this because there's something bigger going on.
Yeah. And to kind of address what you kind of hinted at earlier, which is the whole, it's not just a trend thing. Mm-hmm. And a big reason why it might seem that way is because when more people are talking about it, more people have access to the words.
Right.
More people have an ability to solve that cognitive dissonance, which is an amazing thing and exactly why we need to talk about it. But, and because also think about it, if I was trans 100 years ago, I probably would have never figured it out.
Right.
because there were simply no words. The English language does not encompass all of reality.
Yeah.
We got to invent it along the way. And
right.
I feel like that's an important thing that more people need to hear is just getting access to words. Of course, there's going to be more openly queer people because of the internet. We don't have to wait to realize until we're in our 30s when we discover it being a possibility for the first time. That can happen younger, and that's a really good thing.
Yeah. So, and I think that's really important that this is not an indoctrination. It's not a trend. There's just more information available. So when people are struggling with these different thoughts and feelings and emotions, they have words that they can find and be like, oh, that makes sense to me. That might be me. That's more of what's going on here.
And a lot of that is also happening with like the non-binary people, is opening up the head that, oh, I don't need to be in one box or the other box, that I don't fit into either, and that's okay. Those realizations are coming now, and it's really important because it's able to make a lot of people a lot happier.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, that is what matters.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you.
Yeah.
So when you got to a point where you decided I'm supposed to be male, what was your fear about admitting that, not only to yourself, but to the people around you?
To myself, there was actually, funny enough, I grew up, and growing up, my parents got divorced when I was 8, and now I live more half and half or more at my dad's, but for the first few years I lived primarily at my mom's, and I didn't have a lot of great experience with men. So it was literally, I don't want to be a man because men suck. Was a genuine thing for me because of the culture, and some of that, like, to this day, I oftentimes feel uncomfortable in large groups of cis men just because there's a lot of misogyny that happens there.
Right.
Lord, now being cis passing, it is worse than I could have imagined.
That's not good to hear.
Yeah.
It's not good to hear.
Openly say, like, messed up things to me now. Like, I've had customers at work pull me aside to make a transphobic comment about my coworker, and I'm just sitting here and I'm like, I feel like if I told you, I'd give you a heart attack.
Right. Yeah. And that's heartbreaking.
You are.
That is heartbreaking that people feel like they have the right
it's terrible
to do that.
And sadly, I kind of get like the insider scoop presenting the way that I do, because I'm like, oh, you really are not a safe person for me to be around.
Yeah, because they assume you're male. That you've always been male. And so they're just going to say what they're thinking about anybody else around you.
Exactly. And that's a huge, like, man, did I not know how real, like, locker room talk and all that stuff is. Wow. It's kind of depressing.
I'm sure.
But
I'm sure it is.
And eventually, because it's kind of like, I want to, like, hang out with other cis guys, but at the same time, I'm not going to hang out with a group of people that are kind of being terrible and misogynistic, and it's like, it's weird to juggle that. But kind of going back on track here, my biggest fears with telling my parents isn't that they wouldn't love me anymore, it's that they wouldn't know how to place me in their minds. And because that is a genuine thing. Parents, as a child who is trans, we need our parents' support, and we need their support as much as they can possibly give. But at the same time, it's also change for them.
Absolutely.
And the both sides of that it can be really hard to balance because it, like, at least for me, it has caused me to become more mature within myself and my view of the world in general, to realize, okay, I don't deserve to be misgendered by them messing up. But at the same time, there is a transitional period. It's just up to both parties to make sure that they're putting in 100% of effort to make sure that the relationship doesn't get blown up. But a lot of it is on the, as long as it's all about love, it's a lot easier to do stuff. And like something that my parents have done that have been really comforting for me, like my dad's house, his family was always more conservative, and same with my stepmom, so they didn't register it. But now when they mess up, they go, "Oh, I'm sorry, I slipped up," and then they correct themselves. And kind of reminding, like, for them a lot of the times, it's just they lose track of the pronoun. They see me as a guy, they just lose track of the pronouns in their head.
Yeah. Well, and as a parent, you're correcting years of a habit, right?
Yes,
so
exactly.
When I had to make that change after 17 years, it was not easy because, you're breaking a huge, habit that you've got.
Yeah.
Even if you want to do it, it's still a very intentional, conscious decision, and you mess up.
Yeah. And I've been front row seat to my transition, but also I have several friends, which I help them along every step of the way with theirs. And talking to one of my friends' parents, their whole thing is there's the talk about when somebody comes out as trans, it's almost like the person that they were doesn't exist anymore. But that's not true. They simply exist, but there was something about them that you didn't know yet. So then kind of like how I helped my mom and my parents to like give words to it is to go back and just remember with their proper name and pronouns. Try to plug that in. And it works pretty well. I'm a very lucky case because like when I came out as trans, I was really worried about it at the time, but my parents were like, "Oh, figures." They weren't expecting it, but they were like, "Oh yeah, that checks."
Okay. Yeah.
There was no, which I'm very lucky because not everybody gets that experience.
Right.
But yeah, so that's kind of like where I was scared about telling people. But my actual timeline of accepting myself and realizing people for me was actually really small. I realized when I was in the hospital, and then at that point, my life was doing a drastic 180 anyways. This was freshman year in like October.
Okay.
So basically, after like, I think it was like 3 or 4 weeks of being 100% in myself, I told my friends, and within 2 weeks after that, I had told both, so basically I've got a lot of step siblings and step parents, but I had told both houses, everybody in there, and a lot of my friends online. And my family reacted, they were all supportive, but not everybody got it right at first. And that was really frustrating for me. And especially because at that time I wasn't spending as much time at my dad's house. So they were really slow to get it. Yeah. I already had a beard by the time they started getting it consistently. Which is funny because something I joke with my stepbrother now is whenever he accidentally misgenders me, I joke, if they put us in a lineup, they're not going to guess I'm the trans one. And then that's the motivation for him.
Right. I like that.
But, and stuff like that, where it's just, it takes time, but I'm very lucky at school. I was in the arts academy, so I was trans. So was about 30% of the student body.
Okay. So you had support.
So I had support. And when I came out, we had been online, so there wasn't really a big change. Like I said, I've been very lucky. I cut my hair and was decently cis passing. Part of that comes with just being 6 feet tall.
Right.
And so all of that happened, and I was very lucky to be accepted and find a group of people. Okay. But after that kind of point, there is not very many people who I've met that have assumed I was trans.
Okay.
And a lot of people, they were very, like, accepting to me.
Okay,
but
that's good.
Also, I've noticed that the people that I've met online are significantly cooler than the people in person because they can just see me as, oh, he's trans, and then discredit me from that. But once you meet somebody in person, you get to understand, oh, you're a human being just trying to figure out how it works for you to be a human being in a way that makes you feel comfortable and happy. Yep. And a lot of people become a lot cooler with a lot of stuff more quickly once they kind of realize that. And I'm lucky enough that I've been put in the opportunity a lot where I've gotten to talk to a lot of people that were pretty ignorant and got to actually kind of be like, hey, maybe here's a perspective change. And I'm lucky that in the times I've gone out of my way to do that, people have been receptive. Yeah. That saying, I'm lucky. Yeah. There's a lot of times where people try to advocate for themselves and it falls on deaf ears. And that's really sad.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, it's just one of those things that sucks about being trans, because I remember once, and this is kind of actually mentioning something that we're supposed to be talking about a little bit later on, but I've published 2 books.
Yes.
But I've written 3.
Okay.
The 3rd book was actually kind of, there was a lot of me dealing with not only my gender, but a lot of other stuff I was going through at the time in the book.
Sure.
And it was one of those books where I'm like, okay, there's a little too much of me in it to publish anywhere.
TMI?
Like, not even TMI. It's just, oh, my part of, like, my soul and my history is too intertwined with this theory. Even if a reader wouldn't get that, I know it.
Right.
But, and one of those things was kind of like describing what it's like to be trans from my perspective, was the main character was trans, and basically after he was put on this like giant like mission thing, the kind of like chaotic neutral entity at the time was basically like, hey, you know what? I'm going to make it so you're a bit more comfortable. You know, I don't like needless suffering. And basically gave him the ideal body. And part of the reason why I wrote it like that was because that's how I saw it. I saw it as just completely unlucky. And funny enough, if I wanted to, I could blame my sister because I'm a twin.
Yes, you are a twin. I was going to say, that is a unique thing about this situation. You are a twin.
And actually, it's pretty common because
really,
as we understand more about what happens that makes people trans, a lot of the times it comes in twins, because what happens is the hormones, that the signals that one twin sends out wanting some hormones and the other one sends out others, sometimes some kind of get almost shouted over. So then it switches the hormones you get, which changes the gender really, really early on pregnancy. And
interesting.
So it's common for twins, or at least that's the current theory. It's common for twins to be trans because at first, funny enough, they thought we had a boy and a girl. So their first guess turned out to be right so many years later.
So was that like from an ultrasound?
That
you're
was
saying?
From a preliminary ultrasound. We joke about it, but the science behind it isn't. But it's just one of those things where it's like, it can literally, somebody becoming trans can be as simple as that.
Yeah.
So, of course, it's not super common, but of course it's a thing that's happening. And as more people get words for it, they're realizing, oh, that's who I am. And like, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but cultures have been recognizing trans people for literally thousands and thousands of years. Native American culture dating back to, I think, I'd like to say the 3rd century BC, but my memory isn't the best with numbers.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I'm a huge history nerd, so this is where this is coming out. Native American cultures have celebrated a bunch of different people. In Judaism, there are 6 genders.
Oh, wow.
And those are things, it's these ancient cultures, but these are things that have happened before. It's not a new modern thing.
Right.
It's just now we're putting different language to it, and we're looking at it differently.
Yeah, absolutely.
My transition was definitely kind of interesting because what I did was I had really long hair.
Yes.
I had hair down to my butt.
Mm-hmm.
And one day when I realized, I was like, okay, it's got to go. And then I just stepped into the bathtub and with kitchen scissors, hacked it all off.
All right. You went for it.
It was my hairstylist that I'd been going to since I was like 3 years old was very upset with me because
I'm sure. I can imagine. I can imagine.
I have like really thick hair. So she's like, come on. But I did it, and then I gave myself like a little haircut. It wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible.
Was it freeing? Was it kind of freeing to do that? Yeah.
It was like, oh my God. I couldn't stop looking at myself in the mirror because I'm like, okay, this is starting to look like a person I am.
Okay.
And like clothing and stuff, I slowly but surely just kind of started switching my wardrobe over more.
Right.
It's like I wear a lot of jeans now. And the biggest thing about all of the clothing stuff is binders.
Yes. Explain. I know what a binder is, but explain what a binder is to a lot of people who probably don't know.
Well, a binder is basically, it's kind of like an undershirt trans guys wear, and it makes your chest flat. And there's a lot of different types. There's some that just cover your chest. There's others that also are like full body. Those are the ones I prefer because I find they just work a lot better. There's a lot of different sizing for it. GC2B is a great website. They have their sizing on there.
Yep.
You can find your measurements on their chart, figure out what size works best for you. But wearing them at first, a lot of people, even that are familiar with trans stuff, don't realize how it can actually be quite painful to wear a binder.
Yeah.
It hurts. Now I'm at a point where I've lost a bunch of weight, but I haven't really gotten new binders. So I'm more comfortable now because I'm lucky enough that the way my body looks, I can get away with wearing a pretty loose binder and I still look very cis-passing. So I'm lucky enough that's the reality for me, but it's not for a lot of people, and especially at first, because binders are tight, and the whole purpose is to flatten everything. So there's a lot of squeezing, and it can hurt your lungs, especially if you're like doing something physically active in a binder. And you're not supposed to wear a binder that's like the right size for you for more than 8 hours at a time.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Which, to put that in kind of like perspective to what it looks like for a teenager, is you put it on, that's the last thing you do before you go to school in the morning, and you better hope you have no extracurricular activities. You get home and you take it off. Yeah. If not, like, I have a lot of friends, and I used to do this on days where it was really bad, where like you go into the bathroom and you hope you get like the like unisex stall, and you take like a 5-minute binder break. Right. And those are things people do just so you can like breathe. And this is also another note for any parents listening. please make sure your kids have binders that are the right size. Yeah. I know, because I did it too. Everybody gets binders that are too small because they want it to bind more.
Right.
And that's the thought process that at least I went through. I know a lot of friends that have gone through. I have at one time, basically I was with someone and we were dating and he was wearing a binder that was like way too small. Okay. And basically we ended up breaking up, but I still gave him the new binder I got for him because I'm like, you know what? You need to stop hurting yourself. It doesn't matter if we broke.
I want you to live, and I want you to be able to breathe.
Yeah, like, breathe, please. Don't hurt yourself.
Right.
Or even stuff like bruising a rib.
Right.
Like, it can get scary, but at the same time, for people listening that might sound all of this is really concerning, a solution is get a size bigger. That gives you more time, more comfortability. Right. But it doesn't bind as well, so there are trade-offs. Trans tape is a solution that mostly works on people with smaller bodies that are smaller chested.
Okay.
And it's just finding what fits best for you. But trans tape can be really nice if it works for your body type, because you put it on and you can leave it on for a few days.
Oh, okay.
Because also you're not supposed to sleep in binders, so that's a cause of a lot of this for you. Okay. And there's two like general solutions that I've gathered that people take from it. There's the my approach, which is I'm fairly confident in like my body that looks pretty masculine. So for me, the way to avoid dysphoria without a binder is actually just going shirtless and not looking.
All right.
That's my method, but there's other people that it's like big hoodies and stuff like that.
Like cover up. Yeah.
And like when I was first transitioning, my biggest issue was my hips. So I'd always wear like some sort of button up open over a t-shirt or a jacket open over a t-shirt to hide my hips.
Yeah.
I'm much more confident about that now, but granted, I've been on testosterone for over a year, so I have had a lot of help in that. And
right, but this is a process, and that's what I want people to understand, that when you make the decision to transition to a different gender, it's a process. It's not, you don't the next day wake up and start wearing different clothing and start doing your hair different. It is a process and not an easy one.
Oh, it is far from easy. And if you want to talk more about it being a process, the getting it so at school on like all my official school pages that it was my actual name and not my dead name or name before I transitioned. I'm just going to find that real quick. And so basically it took like a month and a half of I needed both of my parents to sign.
Yep.
I needed to submit a form to the office, wait for it to come back, submit another form, and then finally I got all my stuff figured out, and that was at school. The courts are the same thing where you have to get a bunch of forms through to get it. I'm currently in the process of getting my name and gender marker legally changed.
Good for you.
Yeah. And it is a lot of work to do that stuff legally, but also you have on the outline here using bathrooms, and that's a really big thing.
That's a hot topic, and I would love for you to talk about that because people get so upset, and I have my own thoughts on that, but please speak.
I have a lot of friends that have had a lot of different experiences.
Okay, and that's important to realize. That's important to realize.
Because, for example, for me, I'm very cis-passing. If I walked into a woman's bathroom, I would get slapped.
Right.
Like, that's the other side of the argument that you don't hear as often. Oh, if you're making it so trans people can't use the bathrooms that actually match their gender. you're going to have a bunch of trans guys in the women's bathroom.
Right.
That's the other side of it. And like, and also, first of all, using a bathroom, I'm going to use this analogy just because it's funny. For people who are more judgmental about trans people using the bathroom, specifically trans women, it's kind of like the whole thing when it's like you see a spider and you're in the woods or something. It's that spider is much more afraid of you doing something bad to them for just trying to exist.
Right.
Rather than actually wanting to hurt you in any ways, because most trans people I know, they just want to go to the bathroom in peace.
Right. Yeah.
And there's the whole like story that I don't know who made it up about, how somebody would want to pretend to be a trans girl just to get into the women's bathroom. That's not realistic, not worth it. Because if somebody who's cis does decide, I'm going to be trans as a joke, and does it, dysphoria still exists for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is straight up not worth it to transition because of some silly reason like that. Because dysphoria is a serious mental condition.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's times where it's like, there have been times in my life where it was almost like completely overwhelming. And I know that there's a lot of people that at the smallest thing, they can completely break down. Right. Because it goes back to that phenomena called cognitive dissonance.
Right.
When you aren't able to be who you know you are, there's a really big gap, and you're constantly trying to resolve it. But when you can't, there's a lot of feelings of like depression and hopelessness. Mm-hmm. And like, for example, my two things that I've been the most dysphoric about were my hips and my chest. Because I've said a million times before, and I want to say it again because it's important you know the perspective I'm giving on this. I've been very thankful. I sang baritone before I started on testosterone.
Right.
To emphasize that again, my voice is low now. I can hit like the third lowest note on the piano after being here on T. But beforehand, my voice was still low.
Right.
And so, but a lot of people, it's just, they just want to get in and get out, kind of going back to the bathrooms.
Yeah.
And it can be scary. Like, I have a lot of people that they refuse to go to the bathroom without somebody there to protect them.
And that's really sad.
And it is really sad on both sides. But then there's also gender neutral bathrooms. And we recently had an issue at our school where the gender neutral bathrooms, too many people were vaping in there or whatever.
Right.
So they just put closed signs on the door, and you couldn't go in there anymore. And that put a lot of trans people in a really bad situation, because especially talking about binary trans people that are either a trans woman or a trans man, you have to risk getting outed. But for non-binary people, it's a whole other ballgame.
Right.
Because there are two options for a bathroom, and you fit neither of them.
Right.
And that's not really fair to you. And there's just a lot of bathroom disparities in general. And also, I can speak to having transitioned from women's bathrooms to men's bathrooms. Men's bathrooms are genuinely kind of scary.
Yes.
Because there are slurs written on the walls.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard to just go in peace when you're looking up and you see hate speech right in front of you. And like, there was one time there was a lot of anti-trans and anti-gay stuff in there. And I'm just sitting here and I'm like, come on.
Yeah.
Can we, and especially knowing at my level, it's kind of almost sad to me because I know a lot of that hate comes from a place of such profound ignorance.
Right.
It's like, I know people that it's like, oh, they were like huge Trump supporters, but they could not tell you a single one of his policies. They just liked him because he was making people upset.
Right.
And that's really sad.
Yeah.
But,
we live in a country where you should be able to go to the bathroom and not feel threatened, no matter what your gender is. And I remember high school. High school bathrooms were never safe. Even if you're going to the one that your sex belongs to, right? Because there's always stuff going on in bathrooms. People smoking, people, harassing other people. That's always been the case.
Luckily, though, the harassing other people is something that doesn't happen as much.
Good.
From comparing older generations to my generation, because I don't know whether or not this is for better or for worse, but people in my generation, everybody's too scared to actually talk to each other in person.
This is very true. That is a good point.
It'll be somebody will take a video of what somebody wrote on the bathroom wall and like post it on Instagram. That's what's gonna happen.
Gotcha.
And that's part of it is I guess that's part of the reason why my generation, a very small part, seems to care less, is simply because we don't really connect with people in the bathroom because everybody's just in there to go do their business, usually go on their phone.
Yep.
And it's really sad for me how controversial it is. Yeah. Because it shouldn't be. There's no real reason. And a lot of it just comes from fear-mongering. And it is easier for and a lot of transphobia can kind of be categorized this way. Thank you. I'm on a podcast right now. I was just handed food from my stepmom.
Oh, that is not a problem.
Not a problem at all. Wonderful.
I appreciate you kind of giving some insight into that, because as a parent who's had to deal with a kid that's trying to figure out what bathroom to use, when I hear other people say things that are so ignorant, like, I'm afraid if, this person who's non-binary walks into, that was a woman walks into a men's bathroom, like, what are you afraid of? No one's doing that to harm anybody. They're doing it to try to figure themselves out and to come to a good place.
And I think so much just in culture in general, we're told to fear what we don't have experience with. And I think that's the purpose of stuff like this podcast, is give people a little bit more comfortability with gender issues. And then so you can realize what it actually is. Because a lot of the people I've talked to, it's simply, especially with the internet nowadays, it is so easy for people to stop seeing an entire group of people as human beings and just start seeing them as outsiders. And that's a lot of what happened with the bathroom debate, but also the sports debate and stuff like that. Like, a part of my transition was, like I said, I played a lot of sports. I had to quit all my sports. Okay. I played, going into high school, 4 different sports.
And you were good. I watched you on the court. You're good.
And I had to quit everything because I couldn't play on the girls' teams anymore. And because if they didn't accept me, I was completely at their mercy. So now I had sports. And a lot of trans people have also had that experience.
I'm sure.
And it's one of those decisions that just sucks. And sadly, I get there's not an easy fix to it, but people have demonized it beyond the problem that it is.
Right. Absolutely.
Because the vast majority of trans people will actually most likely do what I did and just stop playing, which is really sad.
Right. But, it is. But they don't think like it's worth the fight. It's not worth what they're going to face.
Exactly. And it's one of those things where there's not really a good answer.
Yeah.
And it really sucks. And stuff like that is it's on such an individual basis that when I see people trying to make broad legislation for a tiny issue, it's very clearly, oh, you need something to keep people angry about, is a lot what
right. Yep, absolutely. I agree with that. Thank you so much for joining us today, and a big thank you to my friend Lisa for sharing her story. Even though that's not an easy thing to do, we truly appreciate your honesty and your transparency. Join me next week. I have another very special guest, and I think you'll benefit from hearing what they have to say. Hang in there. We're all doing the best we can. Have a good week.